500,000 artillery shells. That is what North Korea just shipped to Russia in the last 48 hours, according to satellite imagery analysed by Western intelligence agencies. Not rifles, not small arms, not symbolic military aid. 500,000 rounds of heavy artillery ammunition that will be fired at Ukrainian positions within weeks. And in exchange, Russia is transferring technology that North Korea has been trying to acquire for 40 years. Nuclear submarine propulsion systems, satellite guidance technology, intercontinental ballistic missile re-entry vehicle designs, the kind of technology that turns a regional nuclear threat into a global one. This is not an arms deal. This is a technology for ammunition exchange that is simultaneously fueling the largest conventional war in Europe since 1945 and accelerating the nuclear capabilities of the world's most isolated and unpredictable regime. And it is happening at a scale that makes a mockery of 40 years of international sanctions, diplomatic isolation and containment strategy. North Korea, the country that the United Nations has sanctioned more than any other state in modern history, is now the primary ammunition supplier for a permanent member of the UN Security Council in a war against a sovereign nation. The sanctions regime has not just failed, it has become irrelevant, and the consequences of that irrelevance are being measured in Ukrainian casualties, North Korean missile tests, and the quiet recalculation of every defense ministry in Northeast Asia about what Kim Jong-un's regime will be capable of 3 years from now. Start with what the satellite imagery shows. Commercial satellite operators, including Planet Labs and Maxar Technologies, have documented increased rail traffic on the North Korea-Russia border over the past 72 hours. Specifically, trains crossing the Friendship Bridge between Sinuiju in North Korea and Dandong in China, and then proceeding north into Russian territory via connections through the Russian Far East. The cargo containers visible in the imagery are consistent in size and configuration with those used for transporting artillery ammunition. Intelligence analysts cited by multiple Western media outlets assess with high confidence that the containers hold 152 mm and 122 mm artillery shells, the standard calibers used by Soviet-era and Russian artillery systems. 500,000 shells is not a symbolic shipment, it is a strategic resupply. To put that number in context, Ukraine was firing between 6,000 and 8,000 artillery rounds per day during the most intense periods of fighting in 2022 and 2023. Russia was firing even more, with estimates ranging from 10,000 to 20,000 rounds daily at peak intensity. A shipment of 500,000 shells gives Russia enough ammunition to sustain high-intensity artillery operations for approximately 25 to 50 days, depending on operational tempo. That is not enough to win the war, but it is enough to sustain the current attritional campaign through the spring and summer of 2026, without Russian forces needing to ration ammunition or reduce fire rates. And this is not the first shipment. US intelligence agencies assessed in late 2024 that North Korea had already delivered over 1 million artillery shells to Russia since the fall of 2023. South Korean intelligence put the figure even higher, estimating closer to 2 million shells by early 2025. If those assessments are accurate, and if the current shipment of 500,000 represents a continuation of that supply line rather than an anomaly, then North Korea is providing Russia with a substantial portion of the ammunition needed to continue offensive operations in eastern Ukraine. The economic implications of this are profound. Artillery shells are not technologically complex, but they are industrially demanding. Each shell requires steel, explosives, fuses, and quality control to ensure it does not malfunction and kill the crew firing it. Producing artillery ammunition at scale requires functioning factories, reliable supply chains for raw materials, and a workforce capable of precision manufacturing. North Korea has all of this. It has maintained a massive military-industrial complex for decades, oriented primarily toward the production of conventional weapons, because nuclear weapons, while strategically valuable, do not require millions of rounds of ammunition. That industrial capacity has been underutilized for years. North Korea's own military needs only so much ammunition. The country is not at war. It does not conduct large-scale training exercises that expend significant quantities of live ordnance. So the factories that produce artillery shells have been running at partial capacity, producing enough to maintain stockpiles but not enough to justify full production runs. Russia's war in Ukraine changed that. Suddenly, North Korea has a customer willing to buy ammunition in quantities that justify running those factories at full capacity. And Russia is paying not in cash, which North Korea cannot easily use due to international banking sanctions, but in technology, food and energy, all of which North Korea needs desperately. This is a barter economy operating at the scale of modern warfare. North Korea provides ammunition, Russia provides rice, fuel oil, and technical expertise. The transactions do not move through the international financial system, so sanctions designed to cut North Korea off from global capital flows are irrelevant. The goods move by rail across a land border that neither Russia nor North Korea have any interest in securing against each other. And the international community, which spent decades constructing the sanctions regime meant to prevent exactly this kind of weapons trade, has no enforcement mechanism that can stop trains from crossing a border between two sovereign states that are cooperating willingly. The technology transfer is where the strategic danger multiplies. North Korea has been trying to develop a credible nuclear submarine capability since the 1990s. A nuclear-powered submarine, unlike a diesel-electric submarine, does not need to surface or snorkel to recharge batteries. It can remain submerged for months, making it far harder to track and far more survivable in a conflict. A North Korean ballistic missile submarine equipped with nuclear propulsion and armed with submarine-launched ballistic missiles would give Kim Jong-un a second strike capability that is nearly impossible to eliminate in a preemptive attack. That fundamentally changes the strategic calculus of any military confrontation on the Korean peninsula. But building a nuclear submarine requires reactor technology that North Korea does not have. It requires miniaturizing a nuclear reactor to fit inside a submarine hull, ensuring it can operate safely underwater, and integrating it with propulsion systems in a way that does not compromise stealth. This is extraordinarily difficult engineering. Only 6 countries have successfully built nuclear-powered submarines: the United States, Russia, the United Kingdom, France, China, and India. North Korea has tried and failed repeatedly. The submarines it has built are diesel-electric and suffer from reliability problems and limited operational range. Russia has that technology. Russia operates one of the world's largest nuclear submarine fleets, and credible intelligence reporting over the past 6 months, cited by sources speaking to Reuters and the Wall Street Journal, suggests that Russian engineers have been providing technical assistance to North Korean submarine development programs. The assistance reportedly includes reactor design consultation, metallurgy for pressure hulls, and sonar systems. This does not mean North Korea will have a functional nuclear submarine next year, but it means that the timeline for North Korea acquiring that capability, which was previously estimated at 10 to 15 years, may have shortened to 5 to 7 years. And every year that timeline compresses is a year less that the United States, South Korea, and Japan have to prepare for a North Korean second strike nuclear capability that is far harder to neutralize. The satellite technology is equally concerning. North Korea successfully placed a reconnaissance satellite into orbit in November 2023 after multiple failed attempts. The satellite is assessed to be functional, providing North Korea with imagery of South Korea, Japan, and US military bases in the region. But the resolution of that imagery and the satellite's operational lifespan are limited by the technology North Korea was able to develop indigenously. Russia has far more advanced satellite technology, and reporting indicates that Russia has agreed to provide technical assistance for future North Korean satellite launches, including guidance systems, orbital insertion technology, and potentially access to Russian ground stations for data relay. This matters because reconnaissance satellites are dual-use technology. The same systems that allow a satellite to take pictures of enemy military bases also allow a missile to navigate accurately to a target. Improved guidance technology directly translates to improved missile accuracy, and improved missile accuracy means that North Korea's nuclear arsenal, which currently relies on relatively inaccurate missiles that would need to target large cities to have confidence in hitting anything, could evolve into a force capable of targeting specific military installations, command centers, or leadership bunkers. That is the difference between a nuclear deterrent and a nuclear warfighting capability. The third component of the technology transfer involves intercontinental ballistic missile re-entry vehicles. An ICBM has to re-enter the Earth's atmosphere at speeds exceeding 20,000 kilometers per hour. At those speeds, the friction with the atmosphere generates temperatures that can melt steel. The re-entry vehicle, which carries the nuclear warhead, must be designed to survive those temperatures while maintaining trajectory accuracy. This requires advanced materials, thermal shielding, and engineering that North Korea has struggled to master. North Korean ICBM tests have shown that the re-entry vehicles sometimes break apart or deviate from their intended trajectory during re-entry. That is a problem if you are trying to threaten the continental United States credibly. Russia has solved this problem. Russian ICBMs have functional re-entry vehicles with decades of operational testing, and intelligence assessments suggest that Russia is providing North Korea with data, materials, or design assistance related to re-entry vehicle technology. If North Korea incorporates that assistance into its next generation proliferation of ICBMs, the reliability of those missiles increases significantly, and reliability is what turns a nuclear threat from a bluff into a credible deterrent. This technology for ammunition exchange is transforming both wars. In Ukraine, North Korean artillery shells are allowing Russia to sustain an attritional campaign that would otherwise be constrained by ammunition shortages. Russian forces are not winning decisively, but they are not losing either. They are grinding forward incrementally, trading casualties for territory, and relying on the assumption that Ukraine's Western backers will eventually tire of the costs and reduce support. Every North Korean shell that lands on a Ukrainian position extends Russia's ability to pursue that strategy, and every month the war continues without a decisive Ukrainian breakthrough is a month closer to political pressure in the United States and Europe to negotiate a settlement that leaves Russia in control of occupied territory. In Northeast Asia, the technology transfer is accelerating North Korea's development of capabilities that South Korea, Japan, and the United States have spent decades trying to prevent. A North Korea with nuclear submarines, accurate ICBMs, and advanced reconnaissance satellites is a fundamentally more dangerous actor than the North Korea of 5 years ago. It is a North Korea that can hold Tokyo and Los Angeles at risk with greater confidence. It is a North Korea that can evade detection more effectively. It is a North Korea that requires far more resources to monitor, deter, and if necessary, defeat. And this is happening not because sanctions failed to hurt North Korea. Sanctions did hurt. The North Korean economy is impoverished. Ordinary North Koreans suffer from malnutrition and lack access to basic goods. But sanctions did not prevent the regime from maintaining its military-industrial base, and they did not prevent the regime from finding a partner willing to trade the technology it needs in exchange for the ammunition it can produce. Russia needs ammunition more than it needs to comply with UN sanctions, it helped write. North Korea needs technology more than it needs integration into the global economy, so they trade, and the sanctions regime, which assumed that economic isolation would eventually force North Korea to choose between nuclear weapons and economic development, has been rendered obsolete by a barter relationship that bypasses the financial system entirely. The response from the international community has been predictably ineffective. The United States has imposed additional sanctions on North Korean individuals and entities involved in weapons production. The UN Security Council has discussed the issue. South Korea has condemned the weapons transfers. None of this matters. Russia holds a veto in the Security Council, so no enforcement resolution can pass. Sanctions on North Korean individuals are meaningless when the regime operates as a unitary command structure where individual designations have no practical impact, and condemnations without enforcement mechanisms are just words. The only responses that would actually matter are those that impose costs on Russia for accepting North Korean weapons or that physically interdict the weapons shipments. But imposing costs on Russia is difficult when Russia is already under the most comprehensive sanctions regime ever applied to a major economy and has demonstrated a willingness to absorb those costs indefinitely. And interdicting shipments that move by rail across a land border between two countries that control both sides of the border is logistically impossible without military action that no one is willing to pursue. So the shipments continue, 500,000 shells this week, likely more next month. And in exchange, North Korean engineers are learning how to build better submarines, better missiles, and better satellites. The trade is beneficial to both parties. It is catastrophic for Ukraine and for the long-term security architecture of Northeast Asia. But it continues because the parties involved have strong incentives to continue it, and the international community has no effective tools to stop it. This dynamic exposes a fundamental flaw in the post-Cold War security architecture. That architecture assumed that economic integration and the threat of isolation would be sufficient to shape state behavior. It assumed that countries would choose prosperity over military adventurism. It assumed that the international financial system and the web of trade relationships would create dependencies that could be leveraged to enforce norms. And for many countries, those assumptions held. But they did not hold for countries that were already isolated, already sanctioned, and already operating outside the international economic system by necessity or choice. North Korea is one of those countries. It has been under sanctions for decades. It has no meaningful trade relationships with most of the world. It does not depend on international capital markets or global supply chains. So threatening to cut it off from those systems is threatening to impose a cost it is already paying. And when a country in that position finds a partner that values what it can produce, the entire logic of sanctions-based deterrence collapses. Russia, increasingly, is becoming another such country. Western sanctions have cut Russia off from much of the international financial system, frozen Russian assets abroad, and restricted access to advanced technology. The pain is real. The Russian economy has contracted, living standards have declined, but the pain has not changed Russian behaviour in Ukraine. If anything, it has made Russia more willing to engage in transactions that further isolate it internationally, because the marginal cost of additional isolation is lower when you are already isolated. The North Korea-Russia weapons bridge is the result. Two heavily sanctioned states trading goods the international community desperately wants to prevent them from trading, using mechanisms the international community cannot interdict, and doing so openly because they calculate that the benefits outweigh any additional costs the international community might impose. And the benefits are substantial. For Russia, North Korean ammunition solves an immediate operational problem. Russian ammunition production has increased since the start of the war, but it has not increased fast enough to replace wartime expenditure rates. Domestic production covers some of the shortfall. North Korean imports cover more. Together, they allow Russia to sustain the war without needing to dramatically reduce artillery fire rates or shift to less ammunition-intensive tactics. For North Korea, Russian technology addresses capability gaps that have constrained the regime for decades. Sanctions prevented North Korea from acquiring advanced military technology through normal trade, but Russia is providing that technology as payment for ammunition. So sanctions, rather than constraining North Korean capabilities, have created the conditions for a barter arrangement that accelerates capability development faster than might have occurred if North Korea had access to normal arms markets where technology transfers are more restricted. The artillery ammunition flowing from North Korea to Russia is killing Ukrainian soldiers today. The technology flowing from Russia to North Korea will threaten South Korean, Japanese, and American lives tomorrow. Both flows are the direct consequence of a sanctions regime that assumed economic isolation would be unbearable and therefore effective. The assumption was wrong, and the cost of that error is being paid in blood on two continents. Watch for 3 indicators over the next 6 months that will reveal whether this weapons bridge is a temporary expedient or a long-term strategic partnership. Watch North Korean missile tests. If the next generation of North Korean ICBMs demonstrates improved re-entry vehicle performance, accuracy, or range, that is evidence that Russian technical assistance is being incorporated into operational systems. Watch North Korean submarine activity. If North Korea launches a new submarine class or conducts extended underwater endurance trials, that suggests progress on nuclear propulsion. And watch the rail traffic across the North Korea-Russia border. If shipments continue at the current pace or increase, that confirms this is not a one-time transaction, but a sustained supply relationship that both parties intend to maintain indefinitely. The North Korea-Russia weapons bridge is not an aberration. It is the future of how heavily sanctioned states will cooperate to evade international pressure. It is a model that Iran, Syria, and potentially other isolated regimes will study and replicate. And it is a demonstration that the toolkit the international community has relied on for decades to prevent weapons proliferation and constrain aggressive states is no longer sufficient. The sanctions worked until they did not, and now the world is dealing with the consequences.